Have you ever lost a minute? Not just misplaced your keys or forgotten a name, but truly lost a piece of time itself. A minute that was there one moment, and then, gone. Vanished from the day as if it never existed at all. Most of us would dismiss it. A glitch in our memory, a trick of the mind, but what if it wasn't? What if something was taking those minutes? Stealing them, one by one, right from under our noses. This is the story of a clock. An old, unassuming clock that did more than just tell time. It took it. And in the silent gaps it left behind, something else was watching. Something that lived in the spaces between seconds. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a warning. It begins, as these stories often do, in a place you'd least expect. A quiet town, a loving family, and a simple antique. A vintage wall clock with a dark oak frame and a gentle, rhythmic tick-tock that was meant to be comforting. But comfort was the last thing it brought into their home. Soon that steady beat became a source of creeping dread. A countdown to something they couldn't see but could feel in the very air they breathed. They started to notice small things at first. Conversations that seemed to jump forward. Tasks that took longer than they should. A feeling of being watched when they were completely alone. The clock sat on their living room wall, a silent witness to their growing unease. It was beautiful, a relic from a bygone era. Its face was a pale, creamy white, with elegant Roman numerals and slender ornate hands that swept gracefully across its surface. But its beauty hid a disturbing secret. Every day, at seemingly random moments, the clock would stutter, the second hand would freeze, the minute hand would jump, and a full 60 seconds would disappear from reality. The family thought it was broken, a charming flaw in an old mechanism. They would soon learn the horrifying truth. The clock wasn't broken, it was hungry. Imagine the feeling. You glance at the clock, it's 3:14 p.m. You look away for what feels like a second, and when you look back, it's 3:16 p.m. The minute of 3:15 has simply ceased to be. At first, they laughed it off, calling it the quirky clock. It became a strange inside joke, but the joke soured as the feeling of dread intensified. It was more than just a mechanical error. It felt intentional, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for that skipped beat. They were living in a home where time itself was fractured, and they were beginning to understand that they were not the only ones living there. Something else was present, hiding in the silence of the missing minutes. The story unfolds in Harmony Creek, a small, sleepy town nestled deep in the rolling hills of rural America. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the biggest news is the annual county fair or a bake sale at the local church. Life here moves at a slower pace. Time is something to be savored, not rushed. The streets are lined with old oak trees, and the houses have wide front porches with rocking chairs. It is the picture of tranquility, the last place on earth you would expect a nightmare to take root. But evil often seeks out the most peaceful places to plant its seeds, knowing no one will ever see it coming until it is far too late. The Miller family fit right into this idyllic setting. Tom, a high school history teacher, his wife Sarah, a kind-hearted librarian, and their two young children, Emily and Josh. They were the perfect family in the perfect town. They had just moved into an old Victorian house on the edge of town, a fixer-upper they dreamed of restoring to its former glory. The house was their pride and joy, with its charming gables and stained glass windows. They were unaware of its history, of the whispers that had followed the property for decades. They only saw a place to build their future, to raise their children in peace and safety, a place to call home. Their new life was everything they had hoped for. The kids loved their new school. Tom and Sarah made friends easily with their neighbors. They spent their weekends working on the house, painting walls and planting flowers in the garden. They felt like they had finally found their forever home. It was during a trip to a local antique shop that Sarah first saw it. The clock. Tucked away in a dusty corner, it seemed to call to her. She thought it would be the perfect centerpiece for their living room mantle, a piece of history to watch over their family's future. She had no idea it would bring a history of its own. A dark, terrifying history that refused to stay buried. The town of Harmony Creek had its own rhythm, its own steady heartbeat. The clock was supposed to become a part of that. Its tick-tock was meant to join the chorus of chirping crickets and distant train whistles that made up the town's nightly symphony. Instead, it introduced a jarring, unnatural silence, a pause in the rhythm that made everyone's hair stand on end. The family, once so full of life and optimism, began to change. They became withdrawn, quiet. The light in their eyes was replaced by a shadow of fear. The perfect family in the perfect town was slowly being torn apart by the thing they had welcomed into their home. The heartbeat of Harmony Creek was about to skip a beat. The introduction of the clock into the Miller home was subtle at first. It hung proudly on the wall, its pendulum swinging in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. For the first few days, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It was just a beautiful piece of furniture. But then, the odd occurrences began. Sarah would be in the kitchen, positive she had just put a pot of water on the stove to boil, only to turn around and find the burner cold and the pot empty. Tom would be grading papers in his study, and he'd look up to find the sun had set, hours having passed in what felt like mere moments. They were small, disorienting lapses in time, easily dismissed as stress or fatigue from the move. The children felt it too, perhaps even more keenly. Emily, the older of the two, started having nightmares. She spoke of a shadow man who watched her from the corner of her ceiling while she slept. She described him as long and thin, like a spider, clinging to the plaster. Her parents tried to comfort her, assuring her it was just a bad dream. But then Josh, who was only 5, began talking about his new friend who lived in the clock. He said the friend would come out to play when the clock took a nap. He would talk to the empty air in the living room, laughing and playing with an invisible companion. His parents grew more concerned. This was more than just an active imagination. The house itself began to feel different. A palpable coldness seemed to emanate from the living room, specifically from the wall where the clock was mounted. Doors would creak open on their own. Whispers seemed to echo from empty hallways. The feeling of being watched became constant, a heavy pressure on the back of their necks. The Millers started to feel like intruders in their own home. The cheerful atmosphere they had worked so hard to create was being replaced by a thick, suffocating blanket of fear. The dream house was rapidly turning into the setting of a waking nightmare, and the clock was at its epicenter. The breaking point came one evening. The family was gathered in the living room trying to enjoy a movie night. The clock on the wall read 8:22 p.m. Suddenly, the power flickered, and the room was plunged into darkness for a split second. When the lights came back on, the clock read 8:24 p.m. They had all felt it, a shared, jarring moment of displacement. 2 minutes of their lives gone in the blink of an eye. They looked at each other, the same unspoken terror reflected in their faces. It wasn't in their heads. It wasn't a coincidence. Something was terribly wrong. Something was happening in their home, and the clock was the key. They had to find out what it was. The clock's story began on a crisp autumn afternoon. Sarah explored the dusty shelf, filled with forgotten treasures. In the back she found it, a magnificent oak wall clock. Its aged ivory face and brass pendulum captivated her. The hesitant shopkeeper eventually sold it. Unaware, she carried a Trojan horse home. Mounted in their living room, it looked perfect. The clock came to life, its tick-tock filling the house. It became the heartbeat of their family. But as days turned into nights, the comforting beat changed. It felt like approaching footsteps. The perfect find revealed a sinister flaw. The first incident was subtle, easily dismissed. Sarah glanced at the clock. 4:10 p.m. After picking up a sock, it read 4:12 p.m. She frowned, confused. Later, Tom saw the clock jump from 7:28 p.m. to 7:31 p.m. They discussed the strange clock. "It must be faulty," Sarah said. Tom shrugged. "It adds character." They didn't know the clock wasn't just skipping a beat. It was devouring time. Josh called them hiccup times. Emily felt the house was forgetting things. Anxiety grew. The clock was manipulating time. The Miller household's initial fascination with the clock faded, replaced by a creeping anxiety. Conversations now had strange gaps, as if time itself was skipping. The family felt physical symptoms, dizziness, chills, a sense of being momentarily lost. Sarah avoided the living room, unsettled by the clock's relentless ticking. Tom's logical fixes failed. The clock defied all reason, deepening his frustration. The house grew heavy and silent, the family's interactions strained. The once safe home now felt like a cage, the clock its warden. Unease was curdling into real fear. The children voiced what the adults feared. Something was wrong. Emily's nightmares intensified. She insisted on sleeping near her parents, haunted by a shadowy presence linked to the clock. Josh's imaginary friend turned sinister, urging him to do bad things. The Millers, desperate, confided in their neighbors, the Hendersons. To their shock, the Hendersons recognized the story previous owners had fled, and the house was rumored to be unsettled. The Millers' ordeal became local gossip, dividing the town between skeptics and those who remembered old stories. The legend of the hiccup clock spread, and the Millers realized they were now part of something much larger. The whispers grew louder, and the family's fear deepened. The house's secrets were waking. The Millers were no longer alone. The Millers reached a breaking point. They needed proof of the clock's strange power. Tom, desperate for answers, decided to install a camera facing the clock. The plan capture every second, every skip, with an impartial digital eye. Sarah hesitated, fearing what they might see, but agreed for the children's sake. Tom bought a security camera, feeling surreal as he prepared to confront the unknown. The family braced themselves, hoping for a rational explanation but fearing the truth. They set the trap, determined to reclaim their home. The hunt for answers had begun. Installing the camera was tense and silent. The device watched the clock, its blue light a constant reminder of their fear. The family tried to act normal, but the living room felt like a lab under surveillance. Tom monitored the live feed, eyes glued to the screen, dreading what he might see. The children were anxious. Emily wondered if the camera would see the shadow. Josh avoided the room entirely. That night the camera kept vigil in the moonlit silence, recording every tick and tock. The clock swung on, unbothered by its new observer. The family waited, hoping for answers, fearing what the camera might reveal. After a day of recording, Tom reviewed the footage, heart pounding. Hours of normalcy passed, until the timestamp suddenly jumped, a full minute gone. He rewound, watching in disbelief as the video skipped ahead, erasing 61 seconds. The phenomenon repeated twice more, each time leaving no trace of what happened in the missing moments. The camera, meant to be an impartial witness, was affected too, forced to skip time just like the family. Proof was undeniable. The clock's influence extended beyond the physical, warping even technology. Relief and terror mingled. Tom had answers, but not the ones he wanted. The mystery deepened. The rules of reality were breaking. The Millers' nightmare was real, and it was only getting worse. The clock was watching them back. The discovery of the missing time in the footage was both a validation and a terrifying escalation. The problem was deeper than a malfunctioning antique. It was an event that could warp a digital recording. Frustrated and more frightened than ever, Tom decided to analyze the jump itself. He opened the video file in a more advanced editing program, one that allowed him to examine the footage frame by frame. He navigated to the first time skip, the one at 10:47 p.m. He advanced the video one frame at a time. The image of the clock was clear. The pendulum was at the apex of its swing to the left. Frame, 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 each one perfect. And then, the very next frame showed the pendulum at the apex of its swing to the right, with the timestamp a minute later. There was nothing in between, or was there? Tom stared at the point of transition, toggling back and forth between the last good frame and the first. The jump was clean, too clean, but then he noticed something almost imperceptible. For a single, solitary frame, a fraction of a second right at the point where the time disappeared, the image wasn't black. It wasn't the living room. It was something else. He isolated the single frame. It was a chaotic, staticky blur, a mess of gray and white digital noise like an old television set tuned to a dead channel. It was as if, for that one instant, the camera's sensor had been overwhelmed by a blast of pure, unfilterable energy. The machine hadn't just skipped the minute, it had been blinded. A chill traced its way down his spine. This was not a simple glitch. A glitch would result in a corrupted file or a black screen. This static was different. It felt active. He went to the other two time skips he had found in the recording. He performed the same frame-by-frame analysis. The result was identical. At the exact moment of the time jump, there was a single, solitary frame of roiling, angry static. A void in the data. A wall of noise that separated one moment from the next. It was the digital footprint of the missing minute. The camera wasn't just missing time, it was recording the absence of time, and it looked like chaos. Tom leaned back in his chair, the coffee on his desk long forgotten. He had set out to find answers, but he had only found a more profound and terrifying mystery. The clock was not merely broken. Their house was not merely haunted. They were experiencing moments where the laws of physics and technology seemed to break down entirely, leaving behind only a scar of static. The unease that had been simmering for weeks had now boiled over into raw, unadulterated fear. He had captured proof, but the proof was of something far beyond his comprehension. The static void sent Tom into obsessive analysis. He spent his nights rewatching the footage, convinced he was missing something. To Sarah, he seemed lost in pixels and timestamps. He was a man possessed, haunted by a gap in the data. At school, his mind drifted, the faces of students blurring. He needed to predict it, to control it. His obsession was a shield against the encroaching fear. Sarah watched his descent with dread, living with a stranger. He was convinced the answer was in the noise, a signal of its own. He felt something was hiding in that static. He just had to look closer. The breakthrough was methodical. Tom focused on one static frame from the middle of the night. He applied filters, but the static remained a meaningless jumble. He tried frame stacking, layering the image on itself. He initiated the process. Then, he noticed a pattern. It wasn't an image, but the ghost of one. A structure was emerging from the chaos. He felt a primal fear, but he had to see. With a final click, Tom sharpened the image. The pixels snapped into clarity. He recoiled. Staring back was a face, inhuman and gaunt. The mouth was a wide, lipless slash. The face was looking down from the ceiling. He felt the room spin. It was real, in their house, hiding. The creature was a physical presence. The image was a portrait of the monster. The static was a veil, ripped open. The same face stared back. It was always there, watching. Tom, pale and sweaty, knew he couldn't bear this alone. He found Sarah watching over the children. He took her hand and led her to his study. He showed her the horrifying image. "I found something," he whispered. She saw the face, a shared horror. It was the Shadow Man. They held each other, trapped in a nightmare. The discovery changed everything. They were fighting a face. The night after the discovery was the worst. Sleep was impossible as the house transformed into an active threat. Every tick of the clock felt like a prelude to an attack. The air was heavy, the silence charged with a malevolent energy. The creature knew it had been seen. The time skips were now occurring every hour. The feeling of being watched intensified. Doors would slam shut in empty hallways. The entity was beginning to bleed through into their reality. They abandoned the upstairs, creating a camp in the living room. They slept in shifts, always watching. It was a siege and they were losing. The creature in the ceiling was growing bolder. The siege could not last. The Miller family were fraying, worn down by terror. Tom admitted defeat. They couldn't fight this alone. They needed help and were finally scared enough to ask for it. Sarah called the police, reporting a potential intruder and strange noises. Tom called a paranormal investigation group, the Valley Spirit Society. He confessed everything. The woman listened patiently. As they waited, they felt a small, fragile flicker of hope. Help was on its way. The Harmony Creek police arrived. Officers Davis and Chen stepped into the Millers' living room. Tom and Sarah recounted their story, but Tom could see the skepticism in their eyes. Davis listened. Old houses settle, pipes make noise. Tom showed them the video, pointing out the time jumps. "That's a glitch," Davis said. The officers left. The visit made them feel more isolated. The skeptical badge offered no protection. They were on their own. A few days later, a discreet van arrived carrying Eleanor and Ben from the Valley Spirit Society. They introduced themselves quietly, treating the Millers like witnesses. Eleanor listened intently as they recounted every detail. She explained their theory. Objects with history can act as focal points for paranormal energy. Meanwhile, Ben moved through the house with devices, including an EMF meter that spiked wildly near the clock. Eleanor's theory was chilling. They weren't dealing with a human ghost, but an inhuman entity. The Millers, she said, were being used as a power source, the entity growing stronger each day. The paranormal perspective was terrifying. The involvement of both the police and a paranormal team cemented the Miller family's story into the fabric of Harmony Creek's local lore. The news spread like wildfire through the small town. The police report, though officially inconclusive, leaked details of a possible intruder and psychological distress. This, combined with the visible presence of the paranormal investigators van, created a perfect storm of gossip and speculation. The house on the edge of town, once just an old Victorian, was now the clock house. The story was no longer just the Millers' private terror, it belonged to the town now, twisted and embellished with every telling. It became the new local ghost story whispered at the diner and discussed in the checkout line at the grocery store. Different theories flourished among the townspeople, each reflecting their own beliefs and fears. The more religious members of the community spoke of demonic influence, believing the Millers had brought a cursed object into their home and unleashed something evil. The town's amateur historians dug up old records, unearthing forgotten tragedies associated with the property. A mysterious fire in the 1920s, a family that vanished during the Great Depression. They theorized that the clock had awakened the restless spirits of the past. The younger generation, raised on internet horror stories, traded theories about interdimensional beings and cryptids, sharing grainy phone pictures of the house as if it were a local tourist attraction. The Miller family became local celebrities of the most tragic kind. They were viewed with a mixture of pity, suspicion, and morbid curiosity. Some neighbors avoided them completely, crossing the street to stay away from the bad energy of the house. Others would drive by slowly, hoping to catch a glimpse of the family or the haunted clock in the window. The Millers felt like animals in a zoo, their profound trauma reduced to a form of local entertainment. The police presence had done little to help them, and the paranormal investigation, while validating, had only deepened the mystery and branded them as participants in something supernatural and strange. They were trapped not only by the entity in their home, but also by the legend growing around them. In the end, no clear answers were found. The police closed their case, citing a lack of evidence. The paranormal investigators gathered compelling data: high EMF readings, strange temperature drops, and audio recordings filled with static and faint whispers, but they had no definitive proof, no way to force the entity out. They could only offer theories and warnings. The clock had become a local legend, a chilling tale to be told for generations. But for the Millers, it was not a legend, it was their life. They were left alone in their house with the knowledge that something was watching them, something that the law couldn't arrest and science couldn't explain. The theories swirled, but the terror remained. The final act was one of surrender. The Millers had exhausted every avenue. The only thing they could do was remove its anchor. The clock had to go. The children were sent next door. Tom brought a large wooden crate. He wanted to entomb it. The clock's ticking suddenly stopped. They sealed the crate, a makeshift coffin. They drove to a storage facility. They locked it away in a concrete box, ensuring it would remain undisturbed. The ticking had stopped, but the memory of it would echo forever. Returning, the silence was the first thing they noticed. The absence of the clock left a gaping hole. For a few days there was a sense of peace. It seemed they had succeeded, but the peace was a fragile illusion. The family was forever changed, haunted by unanswered questions. What was the creature? Where did it come from? The clock sits in its crate, a silent, sleeping monster. The family sold the house, unable to feel safe. The story of the clock house became town folklore. It was never just about a haunted house, it was about time itself.